today on Behavior Speak.
So we have athletes that struggle a lot with quote unquote anxiety or performing. Maybe they have performance deficits, but not skill deficits. So some of the athletes, they get really, their performance changes in front of college coaches. So, we might implement something where we say we need to get a few different people in the gym with different college coach shirts on. We're going to desensitize them to them. We're going to turn the music up loud. They struggle with really big crowds and really loud noise. And because of that, we're going to just desensitize them and try to get that,
awesome.
Some maintenance in there, some generalization. And those are things that they can take with, like, they can just repeat that, the coach. You know what I mean? You teach it to them once or twice and they're like, okay, I can do this. So a lot of it is handing them a system and them having them be able to use that system when you're no longer there.
You're beginning to collaborate with Brittany Sykes of the Toronto Tempo.
Yeah. So again, we played all 4 years together in high school. We always been really close since we were in ninth grade. So we just kind of maintain that connection. And she's just as passionate about giving back to the community as I am, especially the community that kind of, shaped who we are. So it just came about from an idea. I shot my friend a text and say, hey, let's do something back at our alma mater. She's like, yeah, let's do it. And she really believes in stuff that I do.
Today's guest is Kersey, a board-certified behavior analyst, former Division I basketball player, athlete wellness consultant, and founder of Practiced. Nakaya is working at the intersection of behavior science and sports performance, helping athletes, coaches, and organizations develop leadership, confidence, communication, and culture through evidence-based systems. In this conversation, we'll explore her path from Boys Town to entrepreneurship, how she applies ABA in athletics, and why she believes some of the most important skills are never explicitly taught. Here's my conversation with Kersey. Hey, Nakaya, welcome to Behavior Speak.
Ben, how's it going?
So good, so good. All right, let's get into it. I'd like to hear a little bit about kind of your origin story. When we were chatting before, you talked about how your work kind of sits at the intersection of behavior analysis and sport performance. Tell me a little bit about both of those things, kind of how you got into behavior analysis and why you decided to connect that to sports.
Okay. So it pretty much started off as, well, I'll start with how I got into behavior science. So I moved from New Jersey, needed a job here. I found a job in residential care for at-risk youth. And I started off working in direct care. And before I knew what ABA was, I kind of was just mentoring at-risk youth, which kind of went hand in hand with my background and things that I've done in the past as an athlete, volunteering in shelters, things of that nature. But before I knew what ABA was, I, again, was just working, being a mentor with at-risk youth. And a few years went by and, I started climbing the ladder and I started realizing, they're using something called behavior science to kind of shape these behaviors that we want the kids to see.
Yeah.
And the organization I worked for, they send you to a 2-week training in Nebraska and you basically learn ABA tools for those 2 weeks you're in training and you implement them back at your site, whatever site you're at. And I was based in Central Florida. I still am. So that's how I kind of got introduced to ABA. Wow. And as I started learning more about it and I was doing these trainings, I was mind blown. And I basically said, everyone should know this stuff. Like, this is how we teach social skills. This is how we get kids to change their behavior. This is how I trained my dog. So I was just really mind blown by everything. I was exposed to it, but I also had two different passions. So obviously my first passion was being an athlete and being in sport and playing basketball. And then once I found ABA, it was my second passion. And I knew I didn't want to necessarily separate the two. So for a while, I was trying to figure out how I was going to bridge the gap and how I was going to be able to do both. I didn't want to give up both my passion. And as I was doing research and I'm talking it out with friends and I'm telling people like, this is what I want to do, I just don't know how, as you start having more conversations with people, maybe something clicks or they say one thing and you realize, yep, that's exactly how I'm going to do it. And so, yeah, that's how it came about. That's how I got introduced to ABA. And then, just started thinking, brainstorming, and boom. Yeah.
Here you are. So tell me a bit about basketball. How long have you been playing basketball? And tell me about a bit of the trajectory of your experience growing up in basketball.
Yeah, yeah. Unlike most athletes who play in college, I didn't start as like a really young kid. It was more of a hobby. Most people don't know this, but I used to draw a lot. So that used to be my first passion. I thought I was going to go to school, like high school and college, to be an artist, and it just didn't happen. But in middle school, I picked up a basketball and just played in the neighborhood, with friends, with the guys. And then we moved from a different city. We moved to a different city when I was a kid in seventh grade. And the young ladies, my peers who were in my class, I believe it was seventh grade, they were like really like hoopers. They were training, they were waking up and doing push ups at like 13 years old. And I wasn't doing that. I was just
Wow.
playing at the playground with friends.
Yeah,
But I got
yeah.
introduced to some really serious and disciplined young ladies. And I was like, okay, I'm going to tap more into basketball. So eighth grade, I played on my first like organized team, and someone taught me the fundamentals. And then ever since then, well, actually, in the city of Newark, there's a ton of different high schools, so you have to take a few tests to get into a specific one. And I got into a high school, which is University High School, where Brittany and I are doing the event at.
Hmm.
And a friend of mine from seventh grade who I met, who was really disciplined, she said she was going to that high school, and she asked me what high school I was going to. I told her. And she's like, okay, let's go together. So I chose that high school because I got in and because she, was going to play basketball. When I got there, it was this huge basketball organization. Like they were like
Wow.
seriously training. Yeah. A couple of my teammates were like McDonald's All-Americans and Gatorade Player of the Year. So I kind of stumbled
Hmm.
upon an organization that were
Yeah.
being like, really successful female hoopers. And after being, surrounded by an environment of discipline and an environment where, these young ladies were taking basketball serious, it kind of allowed me, I like to say, to rise to the occasion and kind of match their energy and
Hmm.
kind of just go all into the sport.
Hmm.
So that's kind of how I got introduced to it.
Yeah, yeah. And so this is the Lady Phoenix reference. This is the name of the team at the
Yeah,
school.
yeah, yeah. So it's University High School, Lady Phoenix. And we had a few hoopers that came out of there, but I had a pretty solid coach who essentially ran the program as if it was a prep school or a college program. So we had to do study hall, we had practice after study hall. So we had really long days. We wouldn't really get home until, 8, 9 p.m. Just like most colleges. And she came to me and she said, if you listen to everything I say, I'll get you into school for free. I said,
Hmm.
okay. And that's what she
Yeah,
did. So I ended up getting a scholarship going Division One to Delaware State. And yeah, just doing my thing
yeah.
there.
And what was that like?
That was very interesting. I didn't know how much going to an HBCU was going to shape who I am,
Hmm.
especially as a Black woman
Yeah.
and a young lady. So that is where I got exposed to a lot of Black history. I do come
Hmm.
from Jamaican descent.
Okay.
So a lot of what I was raised into was a Caribbean culture and not necessarily a Black culture. My
Hmm.
dad is African American, so I have the best of both worlds.
Hmm.
But I was raised with my mom, and a lot of what I was introduced to was, reggae music and the Caribbean
Hmm.
culture. So going to an
Yeah.
HBCU was, exposed me to a plethora of different things. So I really enjoyed it, and I was just super grateful to not have to pay for school.
Absolutely. And what were you studying at the time?
I studied criminal justice.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, very different, very different. I studied criminal justice. I honestly studied criminal justice because I was really into law and order, not because and I wanted to be a detective. I wanted to be a detective.
That's awesome.
So that's really why I studied it. And I really enjoyed helping people. I remember, and even like mysteries, I still really love mysteries. So I remember in third grade being in like a detective CSI class or like after
Mm.
school program.
Yeah.
So I just always really enjoyed it. And then I started studying it in school. So.
Yeah, yeah. And tell me a bit about, you said you had some experience kind of volunteering in shelters, working with kids. How'd you start doing that kind of stuff, and kind of what got you into that?
Well, if I'm being completely honest, personally, I was born into a family of servitude. So my mom has always given back to the community. I watched her as a child being the person that, if she had $5, she would give someone her last $5 bill. Or if a young lady in the community, maybe she was getting picked on because her hair wasn't done. My mom was the type to say, hey, come on over. I'll do your hair. So I was really born into servitude. And again, being of Jamaican descent, that's how we are. We kind of try to band together and help each other. But also as an athlete, you're required to do community service. So as an athlete at Delaware State, we did a couple different volunteer opportunities where we went to like a women's and children's shelter and we cooked for them, or the local schools, we would do like where you read a book to the young children, things of that nature. So it's kind of always stuck. And then I even, I don't know, I always liked helping people. I spent like a month in Ecuador, right, before getting my job.
Amazing.
As an at-risk mentor, they call them like assistant family teachers. But I spent a month in Ecuador volunteering in an orphanage.
Wow.
And so I've just always liked helping. I'm really passionate about, helping people on the next generation.
I'm curious, just another question around the volunteerism. I didn't realize that you kind of said it as if it's just obvious, but I didn't realize that community service was sort of a required thing. Is that specific to sort of athletic programs, or what's that about?
Say it's a required thing, but you want to be in the community as much as you can as an athlete.
Okay.
Especially in women's sports, where, I mean, now it's very different, after everything that has happened, gratefully for, the Caitlin Clark era and Angel Reese and things of that nature. We do have a lot more sports. We're getting, those expansion teams. But at the time, there wasn't a lot of people coming to the women's games. And there's still not as many people coming to the games. So, you want to, bridge the gap that there is between women's sports and the community, and getting those people to come and support you. And a lot of it too also was because as an athlete, you don't have the time to do internships. So you want to have something on your resume that shows that, hey, I am capable of doing these things. Like, even if it's not, my internship was at some point in the courthouse as a, helping in the probation division. But that required me not to train in the summer, which was something you weren't doing as an athlete. So some of it was being able to put things on your resume as an athlete, despite not having the time to actually, find an internship. And then the other side of it is, getting into the community and showing, what being an athlete is, and just kind of giving back. So a little bit of it is a requirement, but I wouldn't say it's a mandatory, but most teams do, 90%.
So coming from a Jamaican cultural background, tell me a bit about how culture influenced the way you interpreted coaching, discipline, and team dynamics growing up.
Yeah. So again, I was raised into a family of servitude. And there's this culture of we before me kind of thing, the best way to put it. My grandmother came here. When she came here, she started off working as a nanny for a family. And, that the family that she worked for, we're family still to this day. We have pictures with their kids together. But if I can remember correctly, that family helped her get her citizenship. And, when other people come by, my grandmother now helps them get their citizenship. And, if someone needs a place to stay, you might open up your home to those people. So we've kind of it's just a culture where, even though people see pictures of Jamaica and it's like, oh, Montego Bay, and it's the island and it's beautiful and it's vacation, it is a developing island. It's a developing country. So there's not many resources. So, you rely on each other to help one another. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe, the income that they receive, like the average is, I want to see they get paid like $100 a week.
Wow.
Some people make that in a day. Yeah. It just, I was raised in a culture of community, and it wasn't something that was just talked about. It was something we lived through our behaviors every day, something that my mom emphasized. So yeah, that's pretty much, how it kind of shaped how I interact with the world and how I show up.
You spent 3 years, it looks like, at Boys Town, which is an awesome place, I think, to sort of learn about behavior analysis. Folks who maybe aren't familiar with Boys Town might be more familiar with Pat Fryman, who's, kind of well connected to that whole piece. And Boys Town is historically is really known as as sort of a model program for applying behavior analysis. First off, to a sort of a non-autism population with youth at risk and the sort, but also for, really making, kind of big gains. And I think that sort of idea of kind of community service kind of translates in there, because they're really kind of taking folks that have kind of been, pulled out of community because of, different upbringings and contexts and things that were out of their control, and giving them skills and kind of, putting them back into community, as more resilient folks. Tell me a bit about your experience at Boys Town and kind of what that meant for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ben, I actually spent 6 years at Boys Town. Yeah,
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's how I got introduced to ABA. Yeah, it's probably not publicized on LinkedIn or anywhere, but yeah, I started off as a basically a youth care worker or assistant teacher. So
Amazing.
I started off in direct care and then kind of just climbed the ladder.
Okay.
But yeah, that organization, phenomenal organization for being introduced to ABA. They have a phenomenal development program and a great model that they use to serve a population outside of autism, like you said. I think they did a great job of introducing people to ABA that have no idea what ABA is. They basically use the behavioral principles, positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, shaping, successive approximations. They use all of the terminology. They make it digestible for people to use behavior science in, different fields. And a lot of what they do, and which I adapted, into some of my own things in terms of like behavior skills training, everything they do is through behavior skills training. So from the, direct care level to the director level, they use a lot of behavior skills training in developing their staff, developing the kiddos that come through the program, things like that. So at the director level, they use a lot of OBM, which is pretty cool because you learn about, the applied behavior analysis when you're in direct care and when you're a consultant. And then as you, climb the ladder, you get right into organizational behavior management. So you get to see that behavior science is kind of just used in any environment. You just have to have a system in place. And yeah, it's a really great place to be developed. I've honestly been exposed to several different roles at Boys Town. So I've, grown as a professional in terms of, doing a lot of outreach and having to give presentations in the community, maybe partnering with different community organizations. Whereas, maybe sometimes as an RBT or as a BCBA, unless you have your own business, you're not doing much community outreach, just depending on the organization. But yeah, it's a great place to be developed and a great place to learn the skills of behavior, like behavior science.
And then tell me a bit about how being at Boys Town, in terms of what it gave you, what you've kind of directly translated into athletic environments.
Yeah, so the main thing is like the behavior skills training. So Boys Town, what they have is that they have this really amazing model, the Boys Town model, but beneath it, they have, they recognize that social skills is what needs to be taught. And they teach those social skills through, BST. So that's the main thing is when I was working with and at Boys Town, and these are things that I shared with, my colleagues and my leaders, like these are things that athletes also need, social skill training. And that's one thing that I've adapted, like, hey, we're teaching these at-risk youth these social skills. I've been an athlete. I'm in the athletic space and I've worked with athletes now. There's a gap. And right now they're missing these social skills. And I liked how the social service field, because they are essentially social services in a way, right? So I really like how the social service field reframes what an at-risk kid is for the most part, and how it's trauma. It's based, your approach is trauma informed. And that might be something that's also, new to ABA, trauma informed care. But you recognize that, I think Boys Town's motto is there are no bad children, right? There are bad environments. And then and you're right. You know what I mean? There are these kids who were, maybe not dealt the best card, the best hand, and they were put into an environment maybe that, didn't teach them a lot of social skills, or maybe it didn't have that much structure. And I just kind of recognized, and I started putting it in my own language, like, yeah, for every negative behavior, there's a social skill to teach for it. You know what I mean? And it's true. So for every behavior that you see, there's a social skill to name, positive or negative. And that's kind of what I transitioned into the athletic space.
Tell me a bit about the shift. So you were working at Boys Town until close to the end of last year. A little bit of part-time work with PBS, but tell me about practice, how you started it up, where you got the idea, and some of those early days.
Yeah. So as I kind of shared with you before, I was just talking it out with some friends of mine who are in the coaching space, and even most of my friends are former athletes, former female hoopers, and we were voicing our frustrations about some things that are going on in the current sports world and some things that we experienced as athletes. And a lot of the frustrations, there was some consistency with a lot of things that we were saying. So for an example, I was sharing things, I was captain of my team in high school and in college. And I remember, I even looked at my yearbook when I went to visit my grandmother not too long ago. And I remember, people telling me about me needing to tap into my leadership capabilities and, the time is now, you need to be a leader and all of these things. And I started voicing my frustration about how no one ever taught me how to be a leader. They just told me, like, oh, you need to lead. And I didn't really know how, truthfully. They made me a captain after maybe getting a new coach and not really having played before. And it's a new season. They make you a captain and they make you a leader, but they don't tell you what they expect of you. They just make you a captain, assuming that and because you've reached a certain, you're a senior or you're a junior.
Sure.
And I was frustrated about that. And some of my peers were saying the same thing, like, no one ever told me. So I was trying to figure out, like, why are we all having the same experience here? Like, why is everyone saying that they just didn't know, or they put them in a position where they didn't feel like they were set up for success? And then even sometimes when I'm collaborating with some of the coaches or, speaking to some friends, some of the coaches might say, like, this generation of kids, they just don't listen, or they're soft, or they're this. And I'm like, yeah, that could be true, but that's a buzzword, or that's not really behaviorally specific, right? That's what we think. So I would always try to challenge their perspective and get, reframe and just say, is it them, or they haven't been taught to be mentally tough, or they don't have enough experiences to, practice mental toughness under pressure per se. So it really just came from seeing a gap, identifying a gap, and instead of joining in on the community to complain about it, I was like, I could do something about it just because I want to and I'm passionate about it and it's something that's needed.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just did a ton of different research, asked some questions, and some of the research that I saw in ABA, I know we have some really dope behavior analysts that are doing things in terms of like physical skills with like layups on the basketball court. Or some people are doing like mental performance, which is encompassed into practice.
Yeah.
But some of the things that I was seeing was still physical skills and it wasn't necessarily social skills. So I was like, okay, there's a gap there that needs to be filled and I want to be the person to fill it.
I love that. And I see that you use this sort of language of culture change and culture changer. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, and as you know, like practice is still fairly new, right? I quit my job in October. So I started, piloting with a few different programs. And as I was, doing these pilot programs and talking to different people, there's this big emphasis on culture, And they have these, bold words on the wall in the locker room and saying all these things. And then as you work with a couple teams and you work with organizations, the culture that the coach might be preaching or that's, titled on the wall might not match what you're observing or you're feeling in the environment. And I recognize that there was a disconnect between the two. And I'm a huge fan of Brené Brown and Adam Grant. So they talk about this a lot within, organizational spaces and corporate settings, how there's a culture that we talk about, but maybe the behaviors don't match that culture. So because I was in leadership for a few different years, for the last 3 years at Boys Town, my mentor and our executive director, Lori Stern at the time, she was really, really big on culture. So she came in and she changed the culture of Boys Town completely. And she made it more like a family style environment, but she also was still holding us accountable and developing us, things like that. And I just recognized that her approach was a little different. So in addition to my experience and the books I've read and the conversations I've had and the teams that I've observed, I recognized that there was a disconnect, and people, sometimes just assume culture is what you preach, but they weren't really reinforcing it or holding, colleagues or workers or players accountable when they weren't meeting the standards of their culture. So I kind of just recognized that, and we broke it down, and, culture is the umbrella, and it transitions into values. And then there should be some specific behaviors that are under your values. So I kind of help coaches grasp that concept. Like, it's not what you're just talking about in the 5-minute speeches you give before a game or the 30-minute talks you do in between practices, or it's what it's consistently reinforced and what's, behaviorally specific, and what how you're implementing, I guess, punishment, when those values are not met.
Yeah. I think one of the reasons it's easy for folks to stay in sort of the autism disability space is people kind of expect the BCBA to be around and know that that's your role, and know that, sort of you're a cog in the wheel of services and expect you to be there. In sports, it might not be the case, though, so much. You mentioned there are a few folks now that are doing some work in this space, doing some good work, especially around some of the physical skills. But still, I don't think it's sort of obvious to sort of the average athlete or coach that a behavior analyst might be helpful to their work. Tell me a bit about how, because it's brave of you to sort of step out and kind of go in a different direction. Granted, it's your passion. You've got that basketball background, and so you kind of know the lingo. You probably know some folks you can start to connect with. But tell me about some of the early days in terms of how you kind of got your first clients.
Yeah. So once I kind of transitioned out of full-time work, I piloted my program with Mount Verde Academy. So that was in addition to like a local high school in my town. Mount Verde Academy is about 45 minutes away, so it's still in the same vicinity, but not as close. But a friend of mine introduced me to the head coach at Mount Verde, and I kind of pitched to him what I wanted to do. And I let him know I'm a behavior analyst. This is what we do. This is my idea. I think your team could really benefit from it. And I said, I want to consult with you in addition to the athletes. So my goal is really to provide a lot of education to the overarching athlete wellness, like the coaches and the parents. But I'm using the athletes as a segue to get to the coaches in a sense. So what I mean by that is I asked to consult with him, but we kind of met in the middle. And he's like, as long as you also consult with my players as well. And I was like, absolutely. I really enjoy doing one-to-one sessions. I previously, before I was an analyst, was a crisis counselor and a consultant. So I always did a lot of one-on-ones, and a lot of the things that I needed as an athlete, I felt called to do one-on-one sessions, with Mount Verde's team. So I do a lot of, I guess, I know we don't use this word in ABA, but mental performance with the athletes one-on-one. And then I consult with the coaches. So I kind of pitched what I wanted to do. He was game. He's like, absolutely. He liked what I was doing so much. He took it to the athletic director. So they're bringing me on a second year. But yeah, that's basically what I did. I traveled with them. So I got an opportunity to, do some sessions on the road. And I actually now have an opportunity to do it to the entire school.
Wow.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's an opportunity. So nothing is set in stone yet, but they actually are I'll tell you guys one story. I'll tell you one story, Ben.
Yeah.
So I used video modeling with one of the players on Mount Verde's team. And I didn't do it with physical skills. I did it with a skill in terms of leadership and communication. And scratch that. It wasn't leadership. It was confidence. So I had this athlete. She was struggling with her confidence. And I do a lot of video modeling. So I would record sessions, record practices. And then in our one-on-one, I would, share some of what I'm seeing on the screen. And this one athlete, she struggled with confidence. And we analyzed her body language and the certain behaviors that was showing that she lacked some confidence. And it was very obvious, like, she would pull on her jersey or she'd be really quiet. You could just tell based off of her behaviors on the court that she lacked a lot of confidence. So what we did is we operationalized what confidence was. We came up with some behaviorally specific things. I asked her, what do confident people do behavior-wise? She told me, and then we came up with a plan to, do these behaviors in practice. And we would start off like, hey, I need you to do this 3 times in practice.
Nice.
And maybe she was just, adjusting herself so she wasn't pulling on her jersey. And then maybe she would be super, super vocal because she told me operationally that is what confident people do. They speak up and they're loud. And slowly but surely, and it didn't really take long.
Yeah.
You saw, like when we did the video modeling at the end, she was a completely different player. She had to be a captain of the team. She's the loudest person on the floor. She's the person bringing the most energy. She was no longer, pulling on her jersey, things like that. So the coach was really excited about it, and the AD found out about it, and they're like, you know what, we love what you're doing. And then it became a thing where they were like, would you consider recording our coaches as well? Like, analyzing their behavior. And I was like, I've never done it, but I would be open to it for sure. Like whatever, gets the job done. So they kind of saw that it was really working, and I gave them a little bit of data, some testimonials, and they're like, yeah, we want to bring you back next year. Yeah. So
that's a powerful example.
Cool. Yeah, it was pretty cool. It was really cool.
Yeah. And I also love how, you're doing sort of everything right too. I love how you included the player and even defining the behaviors, what they thought confidence looked like, so they were partnered with you all the way through the process. And so they had that buy-in the whole time. That's really cool.
Yeah. You would think they would be a little resistant.
Yeah.
Because it's something different. But a lot of what I've learned is everything's about relationship building, right? What are your goals? I'm going to help you reach your goals. You want to get into college. These are the things that it takes. You just have to meet me halfway. So once you kind of, build that rapport, which is what we do in ABA, right? You start pairing with them and you talk to them about other things or, things like that. And you kind of get them to buy in a lot quicker.
So cool. Confidence is something that a lot of folks struggle with. And the fact that you're able to operationalize that and break it down to a few different things, the tugging on the jersey, that's a great catch. Some of these pieces, again, that's knowing the environment and having that experience. But, it takes a long time for folks to build confidence. And it sounds like you did it pretty quickly.
Yeah. And honestly, it depends on the athlete, depends on the client, right? So, that one worked fairly quick.
Yeah.
Some you have to, use acceptance and commitment therapy with them. So it really just depends on the athlete for sure.
Yeah. I got to say, I love your website too, and kind of how it breaks everything down. And you've got this you've really developed this kind of core framework you're calling the practice method. I wonder if you could break that down a bit for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So Ben, you know this because I rebranded. I started off as culture coach, but I realized I was leading too much with the science, and it wasn't grasping the audience's attention that I needed to. Right. Yeah. So I had to make it a little more digestible, a little, change the wording as we know. And I recognized that yes, ABA is valuable. However, I needed to systematize it, I guess. Right. Make it a little more systematic. And I'm huge on research. I'm a big reader. I'm a complete nerd. So I was just reading all these books and I was talking to all these people and I started learning about these different frameworks and I started connecting the dots like, oh, this goes hand in hand with ABA. They're, like motor performance uses a lot of the same language as, ABA. They use the terminology of responses. They use the environment. Same thing with the constraints-led approach, which might be fairly new to athletics, but it's not a new concept. And that's basically when you organize your environment to evoke certain behaviors. So like in practice or in a game or whatever the case might be, you put certain things in place, certain constraints to evoke certain behaviors from your players and to teach them different things. So I realized that it went hand in hand. So the practice method is mixing the constraints-led approach, ABA, and then obviously organizational behavior management into one. And then it's like an entire framework where, we go into observe, we analyze, we provide interventions, and then we try to, get some maintenance in there and then generalization. And I probably missed a step just because I'm, talking it out, but that's essentially what it is. So I don't go in there and I'm like, hey, you're doing this wrong. I talk to the coach and I hear what they say, and then I try to make sure that what the coach is saying is consistent with what I'm seeing and observing. And if I notice any gaps, obviously I give them lots of praise, lots of reinforcement, but I say, hey, this is where we could be doing something better. So it's a lot of observation and then, analyzing, experimenting, things like that.
Yeah. Well, you describe this kind of 5-phase model: observe, analyze, design,
Yep.
implement, sustain. A lot of this sounds like, sort of a behavior analysis conceptualization process that we might see, in sort of the typical autism space. But you've tweaked it a little bit. Tell me a bit about what observe looks like in practice, and kind of what behaviors are you tracking in that first sort of 24 to 48 hours with folks?
Yeah. So again, I've consulted with a few different coaches, and usually what I do is I just have a conversation with them and I say, hey, what exactly, what's going on? And they might tell me like, I have a player. I took that player out of the game. She took the feedback I gave really personal, and I'm listening to the story, and maybe she says that the same coach, she told me we're doing all these things in practice, but it's not translating to the game. Okay, cool. So then when I said, I'll ask like, hey, can I come and observe? And of course they're open to it. And what I do is I see if what the coach is saying is consistent with what I'm seeing, or if the coach is missing opportunities to provide reinforcement, or the type of communication that coach is given. And in this one example where she said, the player took the feedback personal, and I can actually share something very specific. I noticed that the coach wasn't being behaviorally specific. She used the buzzword like, let's just say, for the sake of the story, she used the word aggressive, and the player didn't necessarily know that she wasn't being aggressive. And I just basically explained to the coach, which is what I do with the RBTs I work with part time. And I said, what aggression looks like to you is very different than what it looks like to someone else. If you picked up your child from school, they received a referral and it says, James was aggressive. You would be offended and you would say, my child is not aggressive, but what is aggressive to you looks different than what it looks like to Ben, right?
Sure.
So I try to get the coach to be to understand that, the buzzwords that we use and the adjectives that we use isn't behaviorally specific. And maybe that's why she took the feedback in a manner that she didn't really receive it.
Sure.
So I try to just provide little tips here and there, like, even though players need to work on mental toughness and not take everything personal, there was a different way you could have explained what she needed to do better. So that's really what I look for, like opportunities or situations where maybe the coach could have had a different approach. But I try not to ruffle too many feathers with that. You know what I mean? Because there's a fine line. So a lot of it is like, again, just being consistent with what the coach is saying and what the coach's expectations are being met. So maybe some coaches have maybe some issues with their coaching staff, right? Where maybe they're not doing what they should be doing in practice, or they're not as supportive. And I asked the coach, what are your coach's roles? Some of them don't even have roles. They do this. They do. Well, is it written down? It's okay if it's not, but let's talk about it. And they might say it. And then you observe practice and you recognize maybe the behavior that you're seeing in practice is an assistant coach leaning on the basketball hoop and not as engaged, or they're not as vocal. And I might say like, hey, I know you're having a problem with your coach here, but maybe their role isn't as specific, or maybe they don't know what their role is.
Yeah.
That culture that you're seeing with your team is trickling down from the coaching staff. So that's really what I'm looking for when I observe some environments.
That's so cool. And it's really about precision, isn't it? I think this is, you could say this across coaches, across managers, across supervisors. If we give general feedback, we're not going to get the results we're looking for. Using a word, and I know this was just for the example, but using a word like aggressive can create a lot of, it's interesting. I've been having this conversation with some of my supervisees around labeling some of these, individuals, with sort of kind of really difficult, distressing behaviors, and calling them aggressive. And then people start to kind of associate that word with them being violent, and they associate it with intention, aggression. It's often associated with intention. And so it really changes the perspective. And for someone not knowing their sort of, their own story and their own personal life, throwing a word like that at them could really be trauma triggering and the whole like, versus and I don't want to butcher it, but you want to work on your layup or whatever.
Yeah.
You're taking 2 steps instead of 3, or whatever the specific sort of instruction you want to give. Big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And the example I like to give, especially to adults, because I think we all can relate to this. I don't know about you, Ben, But for me, myself, and a lot of women, we hate to be told to calm down or relax, right? So like when you say calm down or relax, it's a very triggering word. So instead I say, instead of using those words like calm down or relax, because that's not, I mean, we know what it looks like, but sometimes we need to be told what to do. So instead, maybe try take a deep breath, or hey, you need to go for a walk right now, right? So it's really teaching people, and again, just being behaviorally specific about what you want them to do or what you want them to see. And you could just really avoid the triggers, because if I'm told to calm down, it kind of, you know, it makes me turn up a little bit.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we'll go through all the phases, analyze. I think I think the behavior analyst listening can get a good idea what that looks like in design and developing a plan and implementation. You've talked about behavioral skills training and some of the pieces you're doing there. The last piece, though, I'd like to ask a little bit about, and that's sustain. I think because this is an area that everyone listening, particularly the behavior scientists in our field, struggle with, where ABA is really good at developing interventions, implementing interventions. We've got a lot of great research on the effectiveness of interventions. We don't have much research at all on the sustainability, the longevity of interventions. Most of our studies are like, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 1 month follow up, and then we sort of say we publish it and call it a day. Tell me a bit about how you build sustainability into a program when you're working with athletes and coaches.
Yeah. A lot of it is about systems. So I'm happy to work with teams as long as they want me to, but I really do like the idea to I work myself out of a job, right? I don't want to be here forever. My job is to provide you with the tools and head on out. So just really providing them with different systems based off of the program I'm working with. And again, it just depends on maybe what I'm working on that season. So last season I was working with an athlete, and she was one diagnosed with a few different diagnoses, but she was a neurodivergent, right, to say the least. And this specific athlete needed a lot of rationales. They just did. It was what it was. And I tried to explain that to the coach, like, hey, you're not getting through to her because she needs the reason behind everything. And there was a little resistance, because sometimes you shouldn't have to tell a child why, but this generation of kids are very different. So it's really just putting systems in place. Hey, when you meet another athlete in this manner, this athlete is going to need a lot of rationales in terms of reinforcement. Now, it's really hard, and I'm still working on the data piece of everything, but it's really hard to get coaches to collect data on their athletes. So that's kind of where I come in, and I do a lot of the data, but giving them different tasks in their system or their program, their interventions that I'm giving them. And I say, hey, when I leave, you need to reinforce this on let's just say 6-to-1 ratio. I don't know. Things of that nature. That's just a random number I'm putting out there.
Sure.
But just putting a lot of systems in place. And another one is exposing them, like desensitizing the athletes to different things. So you have athletes that struggle a lot with quote unquote anxiety or performing. Maybe they have performance deficits, but not skill deficits. So some of their athletes, they get really, their performance changes in front of college coaches. So, we might implement something where we say we need to get a few different people in the gym with different college coach shirts on. We're going to desensitize them to them. We're going to turn the music up loud. They struggle with really big crowds and really loud noise. And because of that, we're going to just desensitize them and try to get that, some maintenance in there, some generalization. And those are things that they can take with, like, they can just repeat that, the coach. You know what I mean? You teach it to them once or twice and they're like, okay, I can do this. So a lot of it is handing them a system and them having them be able to use that system when you're no longer there.
I love that. At practice, you're not just a behavior analyst. You're integrating some different frameworks. I'd like to learn a little bit about you talk about sort of 3 frameworks on your website. You've got the ABA, you've got your CLA, and your AWE. Tell me, can you break down a bit about starting with the constraints-led approach? How does that kind of fit into behavior change?
Yeah. So constraints-led approach, I think I mentioned this before, that a lot of it is about the environment. So it's something that they use. A few different coaches use it. So there's this coach at the Portland Fire. He used to be the head coach at Cleveland, not the head coach, player development coach at Cleveland Cavs. And he has an organization called Transforming Basketball. And he uses the constraints-led approach to basically change the environment to, again, evoke certain behaviors. So that might look like setting up a drill where, let's just say, this might be a terrible example. There's 6 players defending a team of 5. So there's an extra constraint in there. Or sometimes with physical skills instead of the environmental stuff, you might give an athlete a heavy ball instead of a regular weight ball in order to adapt. But a lot of it is observing the environment and making sure the environment has enough constraints to prepare them for a real game situation.
Yeah, sure.
You would think at certain levels, a lot of these coaches understand that, practice needs to be harder than the game, or at least needs to mimic it. But sometimes you get coaches who are just playing 5-on-0. Like their team's playing 5-on-0. They're just running through repetitious plays, but they're not really being challenged. So that part of it is evaluating practice environments and making sure that it's either replicating or more difficult than real game situations, so that when these athletes are performing, they're already prepared for that type of pressure. You know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%.
Like last year, we had a player, one of the top point guards in the nation right now. She's absolutely going to get a huge NIL deal and go Division I. The players won't play hard defense on her. And maybe, I'll take a player to the side and say, let's take it up a notch on her, be more aggressive. And just to kind of get her to, get used to having a defender who's all over her. Because if she doesn't get used to it, she won't be able to handle the pressure in the game. And again, you would think that coaches recognize that, right? Like, my players aren't being defended hard. It's not going to translate. But sometimes there's so much going on. They're so busy and sometimes they don't have the resources, that they don't realize they're not using constraints. So it's just analyzing and observing the environment and saying where, there aren't any constraints being put in.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. I mean, we see this in sort of, the medical fields and the first responder fields. We want to, the military, we want to train folks for the most difficult situations possible. Hope they don't occur, but they need to be prepared for those. And if we don't give them those skills, when they run into them, in real life, it's going to be a mess.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. And so tell me about this other framework. What's the AWE?
So that's mine. That's my athlete wellness ecosystem, Ben.
Nice.
So that's the original framework I was using. As you know, I was revamping Culture Coach. So the athlete wellness ecosystem, again, I recognize the gap. Everyone's working either with the athlete. Some people are working with the coaches. It's rare that you find a coach for the coaches, but everyone was working with the athletes, and everyone's doing the same thing. Someone wants to do mental performance. Someone wants to do skill development. Someone wants to coach, right? But there's no one doing the entire athlete, like the entire environment surrounding the athlete. No one is doing the athlete and then the parent and then the coach and then the organization, the athletic department. So the athlete wellness ecosystem was a framework I created where we're touching each layer of that athlete. We're not only going to talk to the athlete and do mental performance, right? We're not only going to work on them performing. We're going to work on at the high school level, at least, we're going to work on the parents who might be reinforcing the behaviors. Maybe the parents aren't teaching that time management. And that's where it kind of also mimics that ABA, right? Where we're required to do parent training. So at the camp, at the event, the athlete wellness experience that I'm doing with Brittany Sykes, we are going to have a parent education workshop there where we're talking to them about positive reinforcement in the home. And we're talking to them about teaching kids different social skills, like how to advocate for yourself instead of talking directly to the coach for them, things of that nature. So we're touching every layer of the athlete, the athlete, the parent, the coach, and the athletic department. And the reason being is because we want a shared language. So if you think about social services, right, there's wraparound services. There's someone at the school, there's someone at the residential home, there's someone in the community. Everyone is saying the same thing to get this child to be, right, a successful human in society. So it's the same thing in sports. If we all have the same language and we keep it consistent, then there's no way that this athlete won't be developed and have these skills that they need outside of the sport, things that's going to translate to life. So that's really the athlete wellness ecosystem is.
I love that. Tell me a bit about parents. How do parent behaviors impact athlete performance more than people realize?
Yeah. So you don't recognize that. I don't know if you're a parent, but parenting is hard. We know that parenting is hard. And sometimes, when there's a lack of structure in the home, it directly shows, on the court or in sport in general. Personally speaking, I come from a very, I don't want to say super, super strict, but the Jamaican culture, there's just expectation, standards, discipline, and there is a certain level of strictness. So there's a lot of structure in my home. And even when we received constructive criticism about maybe us not washing the dishes correctly, there was a formal, we had to say, yes, mommy, or yes, I'm not from the South, but people say yes, ma'am. And that's a part of receiving feedback, right? Accepting criticism and receiving feedback. So sometimes you can see that in sport, and it translates when a coach is giving an athlete feedback and their response is to argue, or instead of saying, okay, coach, or yes, sir, their response is maybe to combat what they're saying, and it turns into a discussion. So it's about recognizing that a lot of these behaviors translate. And although we want our athletes and we want our young adults to be able to advocate for themselves, they also need to learn how to accept criticism and receive feedback, because it not only is going to help you, get playing time, but you're going to get feedback at work. You're going to get criticism all the time. You know what I mean? So just recognizing that sometimes, parents could just be missing certain things just because they're so busy and parenting is hard. It's just reminding them that, hey, these are some things that you could be doing in the home. Again, there's a lack of social skill development, and it's no fault to the child. We're just in this era of electronics and technology, right? These kids are no longer playing outside, so they're not developing the social skills quick enough. They're not scraping their knees and getting back up. They're not experiencing heartbreak and having to go face their partner in school anymore, So the mental toughness or, them being called soft is no fault to them, but you also have to give them opportunities to experience and overcome adversity. And it's just letting the parents know that, like, hey, there's a lack of social skill development, not because of anything other than society is changing, and you play a huge role in developing them.
Yeah. Amazing. What do you think would happen if every high school ball program, and heck, even every Division 1 program adopted behavioral performance systems?
Honestly, then I think it would be predictability, maybe, right? Like I think a lot of the approach to coaching sometimes is like based off of like tradition or maybe what you've experienced as a player and as a coach, and maybe intuition.
Yeah.
But if you can keep something predictable, when you can set your expectations and you're consistent with those expectations and you reinforce those expectations, I think that the biggest change would be predictability, and you'd see a lot of consistency. And that is going to take over if it's not already taken over. So just being able to, I think it'll help. I actually know it'll help take the personal side of coaching out, because sometimes you can take things personal, like, oh, this player's doing this, or, they don't believe in my philosophy. But when you bring data into it and the data shows like, hey, no, this player, yeah, they rolled their eyes at you, but this is what happened before and this is what happened after. And they only did it once. They didn't do it 6 times in this practice. So bringing data into it and showing them like, hey, don't take it personal. Sometimes this is just a behavior that's happening, will help, the adults working with the kids, or even the players working with the adults, right? Not take everything so personally. You said you needed to be aggressive. You didn't say you were the worst player on the team. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think it'll help just bridge that gap and bring some predictability and kind of just change the culture of sports in general. Like that's really the goal.
Absolutely.
That's the goal.
Tell me about kind of what resistance you face introducing this model.
Well, I'm so used to the resistance and the egos because I've worked with parents for 7 years. So like
Yeah.
just teaching parents has really prepared me to work with coaches, because when you're met with a coach who, and rightfully so, has won 5 national championships, they're like, yeah, I've never had to use this. It's not necessary. So I've dealt with that a few different times. Like, oh, I don't need it. They need it. So, I mean, luckily I've dealt with parents like that. So I kind of use a lot of motivational interviewing. I get them to change their mindset a little bit, and I might give
Yeah.
them a lot of positive reinforcement before giving them any suggestions. Sometimes I make it seem like the suggestion is theirs. But then when you do something that really helps them, they recognize like, okay, this person is valuable. What they're saying is true. so that you get them to buy in by, especially again, rapport building. But the resistance is, I know it all. I've already done it. Yeah.
That's great. I love that you bring motivational interviewing into things. Have you had some training in that area?
Yeah. Shout out to Boys Town. Lots of training in
Nice.
motivational interviewing. Yeah. Yeah.
You're really differentiating here. You found an opportunity and a space where work hasn't been done. Do you think you're building a service, methodology, or even a new category in sports?
Say a service and a methodology. The methodologies that I'm using are it's other people's methodologies though. You know what I mean? I'm just putting it all together. But I would say a service, and I do plan. Right now, I'm a one-man team or a two-man team, but I do plan to I'm building my team right now. So realistically, I would like more people to be able to provide their service with me.
Yeah.
You said service. You said a methodology.
Methodology or even a category.
Okay. And then category. So I'm still trying to figure that out. But everyone I speak with.
Early days.
Yeah. They're like, no one is doing this. No one is doing this.
Yeah,
so I'm leaning towards, it's a new category. That's what I'm leaning towards. Yeah.
I think so. You've touched on it a bit already. You're beginning to collaborate with Brittany Sykes of the Toronto Tempo. Go Canada. Tell me a bit about your connection to Brittany and how this project came to be.
Yeah. So again, we played all 4 years together in high school, and Brittany she was that girl in high school, McDonald's All-American. She had a ton of different offers, but we always been really close since we were in 9th grade. So we just kind of maintained that connection. Our families know each other, and she's just as passionate about giving back to the community as I am, especially the community that kind of, shaped who we are. So it just came about from an idea. I shot my friend a text and say, hey, let's do something back at our alma mater. And she's like, yeah, let's do it. And she really believes in stuff that I do. She's seen my trajectory in my career. So I'm sure she's like, I wouldn't want to do it with anyone else. So yeah, it just came about from us trusting one another and saying that, we can execute it, and just kind of putting the plan together.
And so what problem are you both trying to solve together that hasn't been addressed before?
The first problem is really giving a community of athletes, because essentially Newark, New Jersey is an underserved community at times, especially, the kids there. So just giving them an opportunity to have a different way of being taught, to be honest. A lot of them are getting the skills training. They are, but they haven't been exposed to leadership development, and they haven't been exposed to what a mental performance coach is. Right. And even the parents, they're not getting exposed to how to best support their athlete. So really the first thing is providing them and exposing them to a different style of development that's going to translate to something outside of sport. And then honestly, Ben, from the field of ABA, is really getting the exposure that ABA is used everywhere.
Yeah.
If we just limit it to, autism, if we just limit it to, forensics or wherever it is now, and even just physical skills, then I don't think we're doing our job, and we're not serving the community the way we should. So I'm really hoping that ABA gets the exposure it needs, and then it opens up more doors for other analysts to bring it into the field. And I just think about the African American community so much, because there's not a lot of Black analysts, and there's not a lot of male analysts, and we need so many more male analysts. And I'm hoping that it opening up the door to sports, that more men will say, I want to be a behavior analyst. I would love to do this in sport. And it just kind of opens up the doors for others to just join the team, join the field.
Yeah, I love that. And so tell me what's happening at the specific event. It's called Return to the Brick.
Yeah, Return to the Brick. So it's called Return to the Brick because Newark, New Jersey is known as Brick City. So we kind of just did a play on words, but nice. Return to the Brick athlete wellness experience. So it's just a one day event. In the future, we would like it to be a multi-day event. And in the future, we would like coaches to be a part of it, where they're getting coach education. But we're going to start off in the beginning of the session where we set expectations, right? This is going to be quote unquote the lab. This is where you're going to get uncomfortable. You're going to try different things. These are the expectations for the day. We transition them into on-court training. We do a lot of constraints-led teaching, constraints-led drills, and then we take them to the classroom where we teach them different social skills. And because it's a one-day event, I have to be very strategic about which social skills I'm going to teach. Usually the first couple of ones that I've done is I might do like receiving feedback. And I give them a step-by-step process of how to receive feedback, but I take it a step further and make them act it out. So we practice, and that's, receiving feedback is practice, or being coachable is practice. That's where that kind of comes in. So we practice it. We do a lot of role plays, a lot of scenario-based things. Some of the stuff that they learn, they have to implement it on the court. When they're receiving feedback, they have to practice those things on the court. And then we have an athlete wellness panel as well. So we are exposing them to a licensed psychotherapist, a chiropractor, a professional athlete, Brittany Sykes, and a strength and conditioning coach. And that's kind of just like hitting the athlete wellness portion, exposing them to different sides of wellness that's going to elevate them as athletes.
Yeah.
And then we put them into another classroom session. And then at the end, that's when we have them do live play where they have to implement everything together. We give them different awards, and none of the awards are based off of like stats or anything. It's like the culture athlete of the day, best communicator, things like that. And then we do a parent workshop, and I give the parents, a bunch of different data. Like, hey, this is not personally me speaking. This is what the data is showing. I give them tools. We have a couple people chime in to speak, and then we send them on their way.
Wow, that's a full day.
Yeah. I'm really excited about it. I'm like super geeked.
Absolutely. And also a side bonus is I think you're also exposing these kids to other opportunities in sports, maybe besides becoming the professional athlete, a role like yours. I mean, even just introducing the BCBA role to high school kids. So I talked about this with Danielle Judy and just recently and Jewel Parham about how, Black kids in particular don't find behavior analysis till so late in their careers.
Yeah.
And they talked about how you'll find that most young Black behavior analysts are quite a bit older than their non-Black counterparts because of just the nature of people exposing them to the field. And so this is a great opportunity to expose them to behavior analysis, expose them to strength conditioning, all these other roles.
Yeah, that's the plan. Yeah, I'm really excited for them to see just something different. Like you said, they haven't been exposed to it. And a lot of people are like, like Criminal Minds. And I'm like, no, not like Criminal Minds. So just getting them to understand what it actually is will be pretty cool, in my opinion.
Tell me about what we obviously have Return to the Brick. Tell me about what else you have coming up and sort of your plans, sort of 6-12 months going forward.
Yeah, so that'll be the first event. So if you noticed on the site, there's different tiers. So there's Perform, Partner, Lead, and Build. So Perform is my one-on-one services, and then Partner is like when coaches or athletes want to partner with specific events. All of those events have to be behavior science backed. So it just depends. I know this year I'm pretty stacked just because I'm actually like this year I'm going to be working directly with, again, Mount Verde. But I'm going to be doing a lot more traveling. So before, now I'm on retainer and, things of that nature. So shout out to me for just piloting it. And then they're like, yeah,
right.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
So I'll be really busy with Mount Verde Academy this year. And honestly, after that, I'll see where it goes. I have my one-on-one clients. I don't have any huge events coming up other than me kind of just preparing for what's going to come with Mount Verde. I'm going to be doing a lot more data with Mount Verde, and I want to say finalizing some things or tweaking some things, making it more concrete and building a team. So no huge events outside of Return to the Brick, but just building my team. That's what I'm most looking forward to, building my team and being able to scale, but also keeping the quality of the services.
Yeah. I think people need to understand, you've been a BCBA for a year. You've been when I spoke to you late last year, you had some dreams, you had some ideas, but not a lot had come to fruition. And you've done so much in the last 8-10 months that's mind blowing. And so I can't wait to sort of see where you are a year from now, 2 years from now,
Yeah.
as more and more people start to see the work you're doing and sort of the effectiveness of sort of simple interventions on these players, on these coaches. I think the sky's the limit for what could happen for you.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate you sharing that. And honestly, Ben, I have really great mentors who really see a lot of potential and have, in the past 3 years and just exposed me to different things and gave me a lot of guidance that I might have not received, as an athlete or as a
Yeah.
a teenager. And I kind of just lean into that. So yeah, it's only been a year since my certification. So I'm excited. I've been in the field for a while, so I guess
Sure.
that makes up for it a little bit.
Absolutely. Yeah. Nakaya, so cool to be here in sort of these early days and watching the growth. Excited to see where you go next. Thanks so much for sharing space with me today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ben, and I'm happy to be on your podcast.
Nice. Thanks for listening to today's conversation with Nakaya Kersey. If you enjoyed this discussion about expanding behavior analysis beyond traditional settings, I highly recommend checking out a few related Behavior Speak episodes. First off, check out Beyond the 5.83%, Advancing Black Representation in ABA with Dr. Danielle Judy and Dr. Jewel Parham. Episode 237, An HBCU First, Training the Next Generation of Black Behavior Analysts at Florida A&M University. Another one with Dr. Jewel Parham, Episode 223, Building Community in Behavior Analysis. And finally, a throwback to Episode 51, I Want to Dance with Somebody, Using Behavior Science to Teach Dance with Shreya Jashmukh. These conversations showcase how behavior science continues to expand into new communities, professions, and areas of impact. As always, if you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, leave a review, and share the episode with a colleague or friend. We'll see you next time on Behavior Speak.